Alright, so this is part 6 in a series dedicated to mastering rook and bishop versus rook. Before we go on to look at some new stuff, let's do a review of what we've learned in the first 5 parts. So in parts 1, 2, and 3, I introduced the tactics of the bishop's triangle, which are useful to know when employing the basic defenses. The basic defenses traditionally involve the defender's king staying as far away from the corners as possible, but as you progress through the first 3 parts, it becomes clear that sometimes the defender's king is safer next to a corner instead of away from a corner. So once you've mastered the 5 basic defenses, it's time to study the more complex defenses, which involve employing seemingly paradoxical strategies of both keeping your king in and out of the corner. So it's important to know when your king is safer nearer to the corner and when it should run toward the center to employ a more basic defense. When I went over the second BBF in part 4, I introduced the concept of the third file defense, which is the first type of complex defense that I go over in the series, but you can't completely understand it without knowledge of the deepest wins and other types of complex defenses. And note that I didn't play the most professional moves when showing the second BBF in part 4. I was just kind of showing the general ideas without going much into the details. But later in this video, I'll be examining the second BBF with more optimal moves. So in part 4, I show that when the attacker tries to transform the second BBF into a fourth BBF, the defender gets a third rank defense, but it's a complex third rank defense because the defender doesn't have time to run toward the center while employing a basic defense. The defender has to stay outside the bishop's triangle where it's dangerously close to the corner, but still far away enough so that there's no checkmate like in the first BBF. The defender holds a draw by remaneuvering the rook to plan to check from an active location whenever the attacker's king opposes the defender's on the second file, and the defender's rook can return to plan to check along the third rank in case the bishop moves off. These are the basic ideas that I introduced in part 4, and at the end I introduced these 6 important positions that are fundamental to understanding the complex third rank defense, but I left off there because it's not completely clear as to why 3 of these positions are draws, but the other 3 are wins requiring 30 plus moves. We can refer to these positions as hat formations. The hat formation and the second BBF are 2 of the 4 fundamental formations you need to master before you can master the deepest wins of rook and bishop versus rook. So in part 5, I went over how to win positions that are as deep as 29 moves, while introducing 2 new types of complex formations, the discovery formation and the arrow formation. The discovery formation is a type of third file defense that's prone to zugzwang. I referred to key position number 6 as the arrow formation, but we can extend this terminology to similar looking positions such as key positions number 3 and key position number 4, and refer to them as arrow S, where the bishop operates on the long diagonal where it controls the corner and it's trying to force the defender's king closer to the center. So the 4 fundamental formations are arrow-esque, discovery, hat, and the second BBF. These are the most naturally occurring positional structures, so classifying them makes it easier to identify them when they turn up or have the potential to turn up. Knowledge of these 4 formations is essential to understanding and solving the longest wins of rook and bishop versus rook, because there are many positions that are very similar in structure, yet very different in evaluation, and it's not always obvious as to why. Alright, so throughout the series I've been comparing similar positions side by side and listing the evaluations of those similar positions, but after a while it gets to be too many diagrams, so in this video I'm going to do something different where instead of listing individual positions, I'm going to set the pieces up without the defender's rook on the board and then use colored dots to list the differences in evaluations based on whether the position is a draw or a win and how easy the win is. So a white dot means the position is a draw if the defender's rook is on that square and it's the attacker's turn to move. So if white's rook is on any of the squares where there's a white dot, then it's going to be a draw, and all these positions are with black to move. And then red dots mean the position is a win in 5 or more moves, and an orange dot means it's 10 or more moves. And if a square is unmarked, then that means it's a win in less than 5 moves if the defender's rook is on that square. So most of the stuff on this page is just going to be review, but this will allow us to get used to this method of displaying the data before we look at some newer stuff. Alright, so when it comes to evaluating positions in which the defender's king is 1 square into the bishop's triangle, the bishop is on the 3rd, 4th, or 5th rank, and the attacker's rook is threatening a contact checkmate, the rules are as follows. It's always a draw if the defender's rook occupies a 1st rank square that defends against the threat of a contact checkmate, and there is at least 1 extra square for it to use to waste moves. A check coming from the 2nd rank is always a draw, unless the bishop is defending that square. A safe check coming from the 3rd rank from the opposite side of the bishop's main diagonal will always lead to a draw by a Zen defense in the event of a 4th rank retreat, or by potential stalemate sacrifices in the event of a 2nd rank invasion. The exceptions are when the attacker is able to manage a decisive 2nd rank invasion, which requires that the bishop is preventing an additional check along the 2nd rank, and the formation is in the 5th column. A safe check coming from the 3rd rank from the same side of the bishop's main diagonal is still always a draw, because either the defender's rook will be able to move into a 1st rank defense, or the defender's king will be able to move into a Zen defense. The exceptions are in the 4th and 5th columns, where the resulting Zen defense in the 5th column subjects the defender's rook to a skewer, and the resulting 1st rank defense in the 4th column doesn't allow the defender's rook to waste moves. It's always a simple checkmate if the defender's rook uses its king support to obstruct the attacker's rook's path to checkmate, because the defender's rook will be obstructing its king's escape route. The exceptions are when the bishop is on the edge where it can't give a critical check when needed, which occur in the 1st column when the bishop is on the 4th rank, and in the 2nd column if the bishop is on the 5th rank. There are no exceptions with the bishop on the 3rd rank, because its unique checkmating sequence only requires the rook to move. A check coming from the 1st rank is always an easy win if the bishop is on the 4th rank, though it's not so simple in the 1st column where the defender's rook can access the 2nd rank, which exploits the bishop's location on the edge where it doesn't have a pin. A check coming from the 1st rank is always a draw if the bishop is on the 5th rank, because the defender's rook can gain a tempo attacking the bishop from the 5th rank while remaneuvering into a 3rd rank defensive location. The exception is in the 5th column where the defender's king is too close to the corner, so the attacker can get away with checking along the 2nd file. It's a position that occurs during key position number 3, where the defender must play into a 4th BBF to avoid a quicker loss on the perpendicular edge. A check coming from the 1st rank is always a win if the bishop is on the 3rd rank. Even though the attacker's king will have to retreat to the 4th rank, the defender's rook will be obstructing its king's escape route, and the bishop will be in a position to employ a BBF when the defender's rook activates. The exception is in the 5th column, where the resulting BBF is a 2nd BBF, so the defender will be able to hold a draw. So, ironically, if the bishop is on the 5th rank, then a 1st rank check is only a win in the 5th column positions, yet if the bishop is on the 3rd rank, then it's only a draw in the 5th column positions. And it's not very hard to understand this inconsistency if you understand how a bishop on the 3rd rank can resemble 2 different bishop's triangles, and the triangle it resembles depends on which side the attacker's king is ending up on. So the arrow-esque formations with the bishop on the 3rd rank tend to be closely related to the 2nd BBF and the 2nd Zen, which are both draws, whereas the arrow-esque formations with the bishop on the 4th or 5th rank tend to be more closely related to the 5th Zen and the 5th BBF, which are both wins. Note that in the rightmost position with white's rook checking at d1, black can still win if its rook is on a7 instead of a8, but we'll get to that later when studying the hat in the 2nd BBF. Alright, so since positions with the bishop on the 3rd rank tend to behave differently compared to when the bishop is on the 4th or 5th rank, the term arrow-esque should only apply to positions with the bishop on the 4th or 5th rank. The bishop will usually only move to the third rank when refuting a bad move, but otherwise it's not a good post because it often causes the attacker's king to need to retreat to the fourth rank, which can lead to a second BPF or a second Zen, but also a hat formation. So recall in part 5 when I went over the bishop's most optimal placements, the third rank on the long diagonal wasn't included. The bishop's two most optimal posts are the fourth and fifth rank squares on the long diagonal, which can represent arrow-esque formations, or the fifth Zen or fourth BBF. Its third and fourth best squares are the third and fourth rank squares along the next diagonal, which can represent hat or discovery formations. The squares that can represent the second BBF or second Zen aren't considered to be optimal posts because both of those formations are draws. They generally have the least winning prospects compared to the optimal posts. Out of the four fundamental complex formations, the second BBFs tend to be the best for the defender, and the arrow-esque formations tend to be the best for the attacker. Those in part 5 when I first introduced the arrow-esque formations, but I hadn't yet given them a formal name, and I had only gone over the positions that are relevant to solving key positions 3 through 6. So before we can go beyond key position number 6, we need to master the arrow-esque formations from a more concrete perspective, because many of the arrow-esque formations that can result from subvariations of more complex positions are going to be slightly different than the positions that we're familiar with from part 5, so it's useful to master them beforehand. So, a position should be classified as arrow-esque if it meets the following criteria. The bishop is on the long diagonal, specifically on the fourth or fifth rank. The attacker's king is on the third rank, specifically on the fourth or third file. The defender's king is adjacent to the critical corner, or directly in the corner for cases where the bishop's path is obstructed. The rooks can be anywhere, but it's most fundamental to study positions with the offensive rook on the first file or the second rank, which tend to be the most aggressive posts for the attacker's rook and consequently the most likely places it'll end up when starting from an inferior location. So in part 5 during key position number 4, we compared these positions where the attacker's rook specifically has to be on the sixth file in order to win, because one of the defender's drawing motifs is to specifically use the sixth file to seek its king support in refuting a skewer along the first rank. So now we're going more in depth and looking at positions where the defender's rook can be on any square. So first let's establish the rule we know from part 5. Checks coming from the first rank are draws unless the attacker's rook is occupying the sixth file. Safe checks coming from the third rank on the opposite side of the bishop's main diagonal are always draws. Any other placement of the defender's rook is going to be losing. If white's rook is on c1, then rook to b2 check, king to a1, king to e4 puts white into zugzwang and wins on the next move. If white's rook is on c2, then black's winning more quickly than in key position number 3, because the bishop is blocking the d file. If white's rook is at c6 or c7 or c8, then black can transpose into key position number 1 or 2. If white's rook is on the first or second files, then black wins quickly with ideas of skewers or using the defender's rook as an obstruction against its king. If white's rook is on b4 or b5, then it can simply shuffle between those two squares if black's rook attempts to waste moves along the second rank, because the tempo-gaining move king to c3 against a rook on b4 is not effective like it is in the fifth Zen. Black's rook needs to retreat to the 8th rank when white's rook is on b5, which transposes to a subvariation of key position number 3. I'll show this excerpt from part 5 to refresh your memory. Normally it's not good to allow the defender to reflect the formation so that the attacker's king is on the 4th rank, but in this case black would have a tempo here, so it's okay. Black is winning really quickly in this variation. Like if rook here, then just reflect the formation. So this is kind of like the fifth Zen, but where the defender has a little bit of extra tempo. So it would be just like the fifth Zen if the rook returned to where it's safe from the skewer, and now this is pretty much the same as the fifth zen, where there's no stalemate here. So instead of returning the rook to e2 like in the fifth zen, white can try king to b1, forcing king to d3. So that's pretty much it for this class of arrow-esque positions. Black can win the rest of the positions with rook to b2 check, king to c1, rook to b8, which threatens the thematic tactic introduced in part 2, and even if white can respond with rook to d1 check, black still wins in a few moves by exploiting the passive placement of white's rook. Alright, so we just went over the arrow-esque formations in which the attacker's king and bishop were both optimized. Next we're going to go over the same formations, but where the attacker's king is obstructing its bishop instead of optimized. And now, one of the disadvantages to having an obstructive king is that the defender's king can now afford to move into the corner in cases where black plays rook to b2 check, which can make a lot of the winning positions more complicated. And then also, white's rook checks from a3, then there's no bishop block like there would be with black's king optimized. So there are extra drawing possibilities here, but there's also an extra winning possibility if black's rook is specifically on e2 and white's rook is specifically on g3, which we'll look at later when we go over the hat. Other than those two differences, the evaluations of these formations are pretty similar, but the wins are going to take longer in the bottom positions due to the fact that rook b2 check can be answered with king to a1. In the optimized formations on the top, none of the winning positions are going to take more than 20 moves, but in the obstructive formations at the bottom, the wins can take 20 to 30, 40 moves. So when it comes to evaluating arrow-esque formations in which the bishop is optimized, the attacker's king is obstructive, and the attacker's rook is on the second rank, checks coming from the first rank are draws unless the attacker's rook is occupying the sixth file. Safe checks coming from the third rank are draws unless the attacker's rook is occupying the fifth file and the defender's rook is occupying the seventh file. Any other placement of the defender's rook is going to be losing. Alright, so it's an easy win if white's rook starts on one of the unmarked squares on the first rank. The best that white will be able to achieve is a fourth BBF if the rook begins on h1. If white's rook begins on one of the unmarked squares on the A through E files on the 4th through 8th ranks, then the position can be won very similarly to as if the attacker's king was optimized. Positions with the defender's rook on the 4th, 5th, or 6th ranks can be won with the simple reflection tactic, rook checks from the first rank, king to a2, king to c4. The trickiest wins are when white's rook is on a 7th or 8th rank square on the F through H files, because not only does it threaten an immediate 3rd rank defense, but it's also in a position to refute a reflection tactic with a 3rd rank defense along the C file. Alright, so if white's rook is at f8, then black's winning really easily after rook checks from the first rank, king to a2. Black can take advantage of the forking opportunity on the f8, a3 diagonal with king to c2, but note that black can still win by taking advantage of the bishop's control of f6, stopping the rook from coming to the 6th rank after bishop to e5, restricting critical squares on the 7th and 8th ranks. There's a unique position with black's rook at g2 and white's rook at h7, where black wins with an obstructive tactic, rook checks from the first rank, king to a2, then bishop to g7, which shuts white's rook off from the 6th, 7th, and 8th ranks. Positions with white's rook at h7 and black's rook at f2 or e2 are going to require 30 moves to win, because black will have nothing better than rook to b2 check reaching the arrow formation. If white's rook is at g8 and black's rook is at h2, then the position is what happens during key position number 4, where black continues with bishop to e5. But if black's rook is at e2, then bishop to e5 is going to be a draw, so black's going to have to win with transposing to the arrow formation. The rook's path to retreat is going to be obstructed by the bishop, so it's going to take longer for black to win here compared to in key position number 4. Black's going to have to transpose to key position number 6, because if black tries to win with bishop to e5, like in key position number 4, then white gets a draw after rook check, and now this looks very similar to key position number 3, but it's not exactly the same. With black's rook on h2, g2, or f2, black's winning in 20 moves, but with black's rook on e2, this is a draw because there's no active retreating move. If black plays rook to e3, white can move the rook down the c-file or go for this stalemate tactic. And then this would just repeat positions here if the rook checks from the first rank. So rook to e4. And now white's going to be able to take advantage of this awkwardly placed rook here. With rook to c5, the only drawing move targets the bishop and forces the bishop to optimize, because black doesn't really have anything better here. Moving the rook to the first or second rank would just repeat positions. So this is a lot like a subvariation of key position number 3, where black optimizes the bishop, but the difference here is that the rook's path to threaten a contact checkmate is obstructed by its bishop, so white is going to be able to get a draw here with rook to c1, again the only drawing move. In part 1, I kind of introduced the first rank check as a bad defensive choice, but that's only when the attacker is threatening a contact checkmate. When the attacker doesn't have an immediate contact checkmate, this is actually a very good way to defend, and in arrow-esque formations, it's sometimes the only way to draw. So white exploits the fact that the rook is obstructed and it can't immediately threaten a contact checkmate, and it also exploits the fact that the rook is not on the 6th file, where it would be controlling the perfect square for white to avoid the skewer. So white's going to be able to draw by avoiding the skewer here. So let's say rook to e2, controlling a2, then we already know how to draw this. And now rook to c2 or rook to f1, putting the rook on the perfect square to avoid the skewer. And if the rook retreats, the correct move is rook to d1 check, because this rook is kind of badly placed here. So if king to a2, black's going to have bishop to c3, and black wins in 50 moves. So better is rook to d1 check, dislodging black's king. And now we have a third file defense here, or a second BBF. Alright, so these positions are useful to know by heart, because in arrow-esque formations, the attacker's rook is often going to have to support its bishop on the 5th line, so the attacker has to be extra careful when dealing with stalemate tactics that revolve around the 2nd rank, because the attacker's rook is often going to have to retreat against those stalemate tactics. Remember, when the attacker's rook is on the 1st file, there's the possibility of a rook to d2 check tactic, and when the attacker's rook is on the 2nd rank, there's the possibility of a rook to c2 tactic. And in these two diagrams, the bishop is preventing the defender's rook from threatening those tactics. But in these diagrams, white gets a draw because the rook has a clear path. So if white's rook is at g8, then the position's going to be key position number 4 or key position number 6. But if white's rook is at f7, then we can refer to these as the other key position number 4 and the other key position number 6, which are going to have slightly different subvariations, but are going to end up transposing back into the same key positions. Alright, so we can call this the other key position number 4. Black's winning in 23 moves, just like in key position number 4, but there's some major differences here. The rook has a clear path to the third rank, so in key position number 4 with white's rook on g8 instead, the g3 squares becoming restricted by the bishop. So with white's rook on g8, this would be one move into key position number 4, where black would win with bishop to e5. But here, black has to reflect the formation to deal with this threat of rook to f3 check. So rook checks, and now bishop to e5 controls c7 and prevents a third rank defense on the c file. And now this f3 check is useless because that would just be a check on the third file, and then king to c4 wins easily. So the subvariations are a little bit different than in key position number 4. If white attacks the bishop, then black only has one winning move here, and that's to first check on the second rank before defending the bishop. And now there's a fork here if king to a3, so king to b1, and now defending the bishop takes advantage of the bishop's control of c7, so it would be a draw if the rook could check from c8 and then come to c2, forcing a retreat. But here white doesn't have enough time to do that. If instead of first reflecting the formation before defending the bishop, if black instead tries defending immediately, then this is a blunder because white can take advantage of the clear b7 square and black's rook is forced to retreat. Black has to do something about rook to b4 check, so this is the furthest the rook can retreat. And now white takes advantage of the fact that the rook was unable to retreat all the way, so normally there would be a checkmate here, but with black's rook in this awkward placement, there's no checkmate here, and white's threatening rook to b4 check, so white has a draw here. So black's only winning move is to first move the rook to the second rank before defending the bishop, because then that's gonna take advantage of the c7 square. But if black keeps the rook on the first, then the stalemate idea that white's going for is gonna be, so if white's rook was attacking the bishop from e8 instead, then it would be correct for black to play rook e1 because the bishop's controlling b8. But here with white's rook on e7 and the b7 square clear, it's correct to move the rook to the second rank, because now the stalemate idea is going to involve checking on the c file before moving the rook to the second rank. So white's best move is to immediately move the rook to what we consider the second rank, but since black's rook is able to retreat, there's no problem for black here. This is just going to transpose to key position number 3 as if this rook had come from b8, and this would be like a mirror image of key position number 3. Because pretty much everything else would transpose to things we've seen before. Rook attacks a bishop, this just transposes to a subvariation of key position number 3. So white's best move would be rook to b3 check. White's second best move is king to b1, but black is able to Now white doesn't really have anything here if this just transposes to what we looked at before, and then this is just transposing to subvariations we already know. Alright, so with white's rook at f7 and black's rook at h2 or g2, black can immediately begin forcing a fourth BBF without having to deviate from arrow-esque formations. But with black's rook at e2, black's going to have to force the other key position number 6, because the rook's path down the e-file is going to be obstructed if black immediately tries to force a fourth BBF. So black's going to have to deviate from arrow-esque formation. Alright, this is black to move and win in 29. It's a little bit trickier, the other key position number 6, because black's rook's path to both of the 8th lines are clear, so it's a little bit trickier to see which move is correct. It's obvious that rook to g2 is not the correct move, because that's going to give white's rook a clear path to the h-file. It's kind of trickier to see that h2 is incorrect, because black is getting his rook to the optimal file for the discovery formation, but white's rook has a reserve tempo, so if black plays rook to h2, white's going to be the one who gets the better end of the reciprocal Zugzwang. So now white has a spare move here, and now this is key position number 5. But since it's black to move, it's a draw. The correct move for black is rook to b8. So now the correct check for white is rook to c7, and white's not getting a spare tempo here. This is key position number 5. White's in Zugzwang, and now black can play back into the arrow-esque formations and begin forcing the fourth BBF. So remember, white's rook can't move to an active location because black can exploit the bishop's control of the a7 square, and this is going to be a recurring tactical theme when we look over the hat formations, because this bishop is placed in the same location it is in the hat. So we're going to see this tactical theme in a lot of subvariations of the hat, so we should give it a name like a first file invasion or something like that. So white has to attack the bishop with tempo, and now black's king regains control of the third, and before the bishop reoptimizes, black rotates the formation, so now this would just be a useless third file check where black wins easily. White has to move the rook to where it's not influenced by the bishop. So rook to h7. Now this is key position number 4. If black tries bishop to e5 immediately, then there's no way to make progress against one of these moves by white, moving the rook to where it's not influenced by the bishop as much around the second and third ranks. So black first rotates the formation, and now bishop to e5. Now if rook to e7, black can exploit the fork, so we can call this like a second file invasion. Usually it's not good for the attacker's king to move to the second file because the defender's king can escape through the third file, but in this case there's a fork here, so the attacker only wants to do a second file invasion if there's some way to refute the defender's escape to the center with something like a fork or discovered attack or prevention of the second Zan or the third file defense. And if rook to f7, then black's king simply optimizes, and the main idea here is that the bishop controls f6, which prevents white's rook from threatening a third rank defense along the c-file, so white doesn't have any way to prevent a quick loss here. So the best that white has here is just checking on the third file, and now this is key position number 3. Remember, if the rook moves all the way to the first rank, then black can gain a tempo and post the rook on the 6th file, which is the perfect square for white's rook to avoid a skewer on. So white holds on longer with rook to b3, retreat. Now this is gonna reach key position number 2. Now before bishop to d4, black checks, because now this is a way to exploit if white tries rotating again, trying to stay close to the corner. Now black has a second file invasion, exploiting the fact that white doesn't have a second zen due to this poorly placed rook. So this is the move that finally forces the defender's king closer to the center, and now the second BBF occurs with no problems here.